After the huge success of both Bioshock 1 and 2, it was inevitable that Irrational Games were going to bring the franchise back and give us an experience that was totally different from the previous two. In 2013, Bioshock Infinite was released, and with it came a whole new setting that was almost the polar opposite to Rapture's. Fans were super excited with this release, and finally we were going to get a new narrative and get to start afresh as we explore this brand new, bright and colourful world of Columbia. When this game released, I remember playing it day in, day out, and although it was only an 8-hour or so campaign, I felt inclined to keep going back to it over and over again to experience what I remember to be one of the best campaign stories that I had ever experienced. But once again, after finishing Bioshock 1 the other day, I thought about the whole of the Bioshock series and asked myself what made Bioshock Infinite specifically that game that made me want to keep playing it? What made it stand out so much from the previous two? And what was so brilliant about it that allowed it to receive almost perfect scores? Well, I booted up the game for about the 10th time and played it from start to finish, and as you can probably tell from the way I'm speaking about this game, I loved it all over again. So in this video, like with my Bioshock 1 video, I wanted to explore everything in Bioshock Infinite, talk about all the design choices, the writing and all the elements that made this game truly iconic. So welcome to WiseFish, and this is my review of the 2013 classic Bioshock Infinite. Out of all three of the Bioshock introductions, I got to say that for me, Infinite has the best opening of the trilogy. Now that, to a lot of you, may come as a shock, especially as I spoke for a good 5 minutes in the last video about why the original game had one of the best introductions in gaming. But Infinite for me had a ton of things within the first 5 minutes that set up the game going forward, highlighted some key things that were going to happen, and also had a lot of secret things that really helped with that all-famous twist at the end of the game, all whilst keeping that same Bioshock feel to it. The first thing that I noticed when playing this game was how familiar the introduction was, and that certainly is not a bad thing. It was almost a copy and paste of the original game, starting you off in the middle of the sea, heading towards a mysterious lighthouse in the middle of nowhere. Booker also has a parcel with him, which if you really want to push the boat out, could be similar to this bit here in the original game, with the present and the note saying, "Would you kindly not open it?" To some extent, you could say that the phrase that Booker says over and over again within the game, "Bring us the girl and wipe away the debt," was his trigger phrase by the Lutece twins to push him forward within this narrative, but I'll be talking about that later in the video. There are a lot of similarities to the original Bioshock introduction, and it really makes you feel like you are playing a Bioshock game from the offset. But saying that, in my opinion, Infinite does the polar opposite of what the original did in terms of setting up the tone. To start with, in the original, you are plunged into the dangerous depths of the ocean. You are completely on your own as everyone has died around you and the plane is sinking to the bottom of the ocean, and you are forced to swim through the surrounding fire to this lighthouse, which is seen as your safe spot. Within the lighthouse, it is glamorous. Granted, it's a bit daunting, but it is well presented, filled with luscious gold and not a bit of destruction to be seen. And then pushing further on into Ryan's presentation, Rapture is set up to be this absolute paradise where science, industry and the arts can thrive away from all limitations. When you get there, however, you realise it isn't what it seems, and it's in fact a dark, brutal and abandoned world. Infinite, on the other hand, flips the situation. When you start, you are in a boat with other people for the first time ever. You are safely taken to your destination, even if it's not explained to you where you're going. But there isn't a sense of threat compared to the burning remains of your plane. But when you dock your little rowboat and get out, when you are in the lighthouse, the atmosphere portrayed in it is one of horror compared to the golden glory of Ryan's lighthouse. There are warning signs on the wall, there is blood, bullet holes, and even a dead body in the corner. Shit. It really makes you question what this place you are going to is going to be like. Who is the founder of this world? And why is its entranceway so full of death and despair? When you enter the coder's world to open up the top of the lighthouse, the giant booming sounds of what sounds like a huge airship in the sky enhances that dread as well. And the warning red in the sky makes you think that this place you are going to is going to be an extremely dangerous place. But when you do finally start the launch sequence and are catapulted into the air, suddenly what you thought was going to be a horrifying place turns out to be the most beautiful sight you have ever seen. Even more a beautiful sight as Rapture when you first submerge into that. The city is angelic, it looks absolutely beautiful. It looks exactly like you'd imagine a concept of heaven to look like, but you still have in the back of your mind the idea that this isn't going to be what it seems. Yet when you land, people seem normal. You can walk the streets greeting people, and it is the polar opposite of how Rapture set up its world. I love Infinite's opening. The design of the lighthouse really makes you wonder what these warning signs mean. It makes you ask so many questions going forward. What girl am I looking for? What world am I going into? Why are there warning signs and dead bodies in the lighthouse? And then finally, is this new beautiful angelic world of Columbia really what it seems? Whilst it opens in an extremely similar way from the original, it certainly tells an opposite story in terms of tone. It takes you from a dark and terrifying world into a bright and beautiful one. But with Infinite being a Bioshock game, you know that whilst on the surface the world may seem idyllic and beautiful and a sort of utopia, maybe it isn't what it seems. And whilst Booker searches for the girl, maybe he will uncover the dark side to this almost perfect world of Columbia, proving that Columbia is maybe more identical to Rapture than you initially think. I think it was a very bold move for Bioshock to move more into a story that was far more personal than before. Whilst Bioshock 2 certainly had a more of an emotional connection between you and your search for your little sister/daughter, Infinite certainly expanded the idea, merging Bioshock 2 with the storytelling of Bioshock 1, and gave us a fully voiced protagonist who had his own personality, characteristics, and his own dark backstory. Having a fully voiced character can sometimes ruin all players' immersion, as they sometimes feel like they aren't really experiencing the world themselves. Instead, they are experiencing it all as an already developed character. But thanks to the complexity and multi-layered focus on Infinite's characters and their own stories, none of that immersion I felt was lost, and I actually felt more like the character Booker than I did with Jack in the original or Subject Delta in Bioshock 2. To start with, Booker's development is crucial for engaging players. We start off as this war-rugged, typical male protagonist that we would see in any film noir film or generic shooter. One with a troubled past, gambling addiction, a real distance from anyone he comes into contact with, and is just done with the tests of life. Even the cover of the game has him as this generic looking American male holding a gun. There's nothing special about him, he is just another character. But I feel like this art cover was done intentionally. At the beginning you are meant to feel like this character is generic, but under that war-scarred exterior there is more to be seen. As we progress through the story and when we finally encounter Elizabeth, we start to see a change in his personality and we learn more about his backstory. Once again, there are no cutscenes and everything you experience is within the game itself. The game has you in the boots of Booker from start to finish, and that for me helps you understand him more and get to know him as a character. As we progress through each level, experiencing all the different layers of Columbia, we start bringing those pieces together. Even from the offset, we learn all of his struggles accepting religion and what he fears it'll do to him. When we meet Cornelius Slate, we learn of the battles Booker has been through. We understand what he has faced whilst being in the army and of the battles he has been a part of and how they have affected him. And when we venture forward, we learn more about him as a father. There is a real developing story to Booker, one that has to be uncovered as you play throughout the game. I feel like the choice of using a generic male character on the front cover is a way to basically say you need to uncover the story of this man. There's more to him than you see, exactly like there is when you first see Rapture or Columbia. Whilst you can judge the book by the cover, there is far more to uncover when you dive deeper into it, and you will see the darker, more hidden features to them. By the end of the game, you get a real understanding of who Booker DeWitt is. You feel like you relate to him more as you venture the levels, as you have experienced everything he has. You have relived his battles, you have witnessed his story pan out in front of you, and you understand why he is the way he is. The things you have seen have responded the same way with Booker, and it means that you and Booker see eye to eye near the end of the game, almost as if you have merged into one being. Everything has been revealed and you know who exactly Booker is as a person. Or do you? But on top of his personal journey, you also have the relationship between Booker and Elizabeth, something that is just so well written from the moment they meet to the all-famous ending. Like with Booker's development, Elizabeth is core to this main story. Their relationship at first is one that is very distant. Elizabeth can be seen to judge the book by the cover because of her naivety to the real world. She sees Booker as this knight in shining armor saving her from the horrors of her cage, but is nervous to trust him as he is the first face she has ever really seen. But as we progress through the levels again, their contradicting worldviews battle against each other and actually help them to become more like each other than they think. When Elizabeth first sees Booker kill people, she is horrified, as anyone would be, and Booker has to try and comfort her, trying to explain that he has to do it, all whilst she makes it clear that there must be another way to get around things. We learn that Elizabeth is a pacifist at heart, the total opposite of Booker. Yet when we get into the second chapter of the game, we see Daisy Fitzroy hold up Jeremiah Fink's son, threatening to take out the bloodline, which ends up with Elizabeth taking Fitzroy's life. We see that change in the thought process for Elizabeth. She realizes killing isn't always black and white, and sometimes it is a necessity to staying alive, and for her it becomes more of an ethical thing and the better moral choice. The bond Booker and Elizabeth form as you progress through the campaign is quite brilliant, and it's so rich in amazing dialogue that helps you the player relate to both of them. You really end up caring so much for Elizabeth as you progress through each section, and with that bond you also see Booker develop feelings for her. He goes from seeing her as a contract to someone who he wants to care for and look after, doing anything for her, with the end drive being the goal of taking out Comstock to save Elizabeth and give her the payback she wants from the years of torture. While some can see this as a knight in shining armour saving the princess in distress in the castle, for me I see this as more of two characters with a bond who want to help each other survive the corrupt and horror of Columbia, and with that they need to get over their differences to form a bond and make a difference. We realise that Booker has a connection to Elizabeth, and the more the game moves on, the more he isn't worried about letting her know, clearing up her insecurities and just reassuring her with everything she does, especially within the section where she confronts her mother. The relationship between Elizabeth and Booker is just so well written. Their dialogue is so natural that it feels like you are watching and experiencing two characters' real journey together. I think one of the reasons why this works so well is because of the amazing voice acting, which is just second to none. Troy Baker and Courtney Draper both give off such incredible lifelike performances within this story. You really understand how they are both feeling at every single part, and it just makes that storytelling all that more engaging. Without the acting ability of both these guys, the story could have fallen flat many times during, but with how real they both feel, I truly felt every emotion they shared. I understood the torment of Elizabeth. I got Booker's frustration and panic, and it helped add so much to the story. The focus on Booker and Elizabeth's personal stories is to me what made Bioshock Infinite that really special game. Understanding each of them equally and what drives them made me care for both of them so much, and made me want to push on in every section. I wanted to know why Elizabeth was the way she was. How was she able to create tears, and why was she locked up? And at the same time, I wanted to know more about Booker. Why was he the way he is? And why is he so distant with Elizabeth at the start of the game? But the story doesn't just stop there. Irrational Games could have just made this game about the personal journey of these two characters, and that would be enough. But Bioshock was never a story with just one layer. What made Bioshock special was its focus on an overall world message, and with Bioshock Infinite, Columbia gives us another insight into a completely new but somewhat familiar ideology. When we first went into Rapture, Bioshock's story seemed to focus on the ideology that it was based on and the characters behind it. It wanted to show why the city had fallen and how they had experimented to make the perfect society, which had left them in their own living hell. The game showed off the sins of humanity: greed, vanity, wrath, and envy. It was as if the narrative was exploring the worst of humanity and the sinful nature of humankind. A heavily religious setting with some dark human stories, but ultimately the game wanted to focus on the city of Rapture itself. In Infinite, the game follows that same path to some extent. Not only do you have the close and personal relationship of Booker and Elizabeth, but you were told the story of Columbia. You explored why it had been created and what's the ideology behind it. Once again, a very familiar theme. Columbia is once again on the surface a beautiful utopia, a version of heaven in some people's eyes. Columbia is seen as what the real American dream is in the eyes of its people. Everything Andrew Ryan would have despised. The ongoing patriotism that filters through the world is clear to see through the American flags flying high in the sky. The people who inhabit the streets talk about how perfect their city is. The propaganda on the street is extremely noticeable, and within every building, within every area, there is a true national pride on full display. It tells a story about what this world is like from the offset. Despite breaking off from the, as they call them, sod and below, they regard themselves as the true Americans, the pride of the nation, and the people of Columbia are proud to show that off. They also show show off a proud sense of Christianity, believing themselves to be chosen by God himself to create this society, with Comstock believing himself to be the true chosen one who leads his people towards the light, like a shepherd does with his herd, which is clearly presented to you very early on within the game with this carnival. The world is very interesting because it presents itself once again as a paradise for those who believe in the country and religion that they love. But with that ideology comes the contradictory nature of it with Booker. Booker is seen very early on to be the false shepherd by the marking on his hand. He is seen as the one who is there to cause destruction and bring Columbia to ruin and expose the city's true identity. It's quite interesting this part because in the first game when you play as Jack, Atlas portrays you as this person that is a beacon of hope to make a difference within Rapture. You are there to wipe the world clean from its extreme ideology ways, almost as if you are God's Rapture on the city. Yet in Columbia, Booker is seen as the devil who is there to destroy their perfect golden way of life. The two stories are the polar opposite of one another, but really playing through it, are the two cities any different from one another? Underneath this golden, beautiful, idyllic city is the darker side to it. Within every level we see a new story and something that was meant to be hidden away from its naive, ignorance is bliss citizens. We see the militant focus and how if you don't join the army you are seen as a coward through the funny yet a bit too real propaganda characters Duke and Dimwit. We see how well it works on the kids of the society as it is presented in a way that is almost like a kids theatre show and its bright and colourful slapstick nature. Yet when we meet Cornelius Slate we learn of the horrors they faced and how war has caused him to become this mess of a man and how it has affected a lot of his men and also Booker himself. We also see how racism is dominant within the world. Within the first 5 minutes, two individuals are publicly shamed for being in a relationship together. When venturing through some of the more abandoned areas, we also see some of the African American community doing the lesser jobs, hidden away in dark abandoned areas and within the bathrooms of luxury apartments. When flying in the Vox Populai's airship, we also see chain gags of people smashing rocks, something that we would have never seen when we first flew into Columbia. There's also the Raven cult, which is a clear statement on the Ku Klux Klan, with their pointed hoods and their goal of racial purity. It shows you that whilst on the surface the streets of Columbia may seem perfect, underneath, hidden away, there is a dark side to it, and that is clearly shown within the Raven cult's base. Moving forward, we also see the mistreatment of the workers of Columbia through Jeremiah Fink's disgusting workhouse creating vigors and other products you have been using through your travels, and how it has led to the uprising of the Red Army, or as they go by, the Vox Populi. My favourite scene within this game is when you first go into Shantytown. The way the lift goes down with the golden statue of Fink looming above the dark, ill-ridden, poor housing area of Shantytown is extremely poetic to show the wealth divide between the two, and how he is constantly looking down on them as lesser creatures. Within every level, like within the first Bioshock, you are learning more about the world of Columbia. We see what really divides the city, and once again we see the world is not what it always appears to be on the surface. It allows you to want to kill Comstock and the ones at the top more as you see how many lives they have destroyed along the way and how hateful this society really is. And with these amazing storytelling levels comes the fantastic story characters. Comstock, Fitzroy, Fink and the amazing Lutece twins. All of these characters have just phenomenally written dialogue that all tell their own part of the story of Columbia. Each of them have such distinct personalities and they really help drive you to uncovering the truth of what is going on in the world. They also have such amazing locations that stand out from one another. Comstock's final area when you meet him is so well designed, making it out to be this beautiful Garden of Eden type location. But after you kill him, when you go to leave, you realise that behind the sunny backdrop is just metal and scaffolding, displaying a symbolic image that even on the surface it looks beautiful, behind it may not be as eye-catching. The world of Columbia, like with Rapture, was displayed to be an idyllic utopian world. Its golden gates, its houses on the clouds and its friendly face make for one unique looking world that was so different from before. But the more you uncover about it, the more you dive into its hidden locations, the more you really question, is this any different from Rapture? The storytelling once again is amazing within Bioshock Infinite, and it is truly breathtaking how many layers of narrative Irrational Games put into Infinite. There is so much to uncover in every level and so much to explore, from characters to locations and voxophones. There is story coming out of everywhere, and it really is one of the best written and directed stories I have come across. But saying that, the real talking point with Infinite, like with all Bioshocks, was that incredible twist that everyone expected, yet still didn't see coming. After Bioshock's unbelievable twist, everyone really expected that going into Infinite there was going to be a similar pattern, and everyone was expecting a big twist in the latter half of the campaign. But how they were going to do it was hard to envision, because how do you set up a twist when your audience has come to expect one? I don't think I've ever seen an ending of a game cause so much discussion and bring about so much speculation than the one in Bioshock Infinite. It is a plot ending that is so unexpected and is such a wow moment. I had no idea when I first played this game that things were going to end with the realization that Booker, the character I had been playing as, was himself Comstock from a different timeline, and Elizabeth, the tortured girl in the tower, was in fact his daughter. Even saying it now, it sounds ridiculous and pretty cheesy, but the way it's developed throughout the whole game is just genius. And whilst it is a confusing moment at the first playthrough, it really blew my mind away and made me speechless when I started piecing together everything throughout my story. Once again, like with the original Bioshock and the twist in that, the pieces were there from the beginning, and if you are able to collect the voxophones, see the hidden pieces of information, and really analyse the story dialogue with all the characters, the ending becomes much clearer, especially on a second playthrough. Even the introduction to Bioshock Infinite with its title card says something about where this story is going, and that it will be playing around with multiple timelines with the glitchy flag flapping about. Replaying this game once again is key to uncovering and understanding everything to this story. Every voxophone once again explores a topic that highlights moments that explore plot points. From Comstock's baptism and forming Columbia, to Slate's talk about Booker DeWitt on the battlefield, all the way to Booker DeWitt's own personal diaries when he was the face of the Vox Populi. Even the fact that the tears are a dominant mechanic and plot point in the story that you play highlights the fact that they will play a significant role in the whole story arc. Seeing Booker as the face of the Vox proves that they are able to move through multiple timelines, and there are multiple Bookers in this vast universe. The constant blood on his nose and the weird moments he goes through becomes clearer when Booker and Elizabeth start seeing the dead walking again. And then you even have the tears, which give you a view into the modern world. This red one, for example, is playing a piece of modern music, which proves that these portals have time impacts as well. The story mission in the asylum was probably one of my most favourite levels because of how creepy and terrifying it is, with the weird speaker looking creatures and the clown creatures, whatever they are. Seeing Elizabeth at the end all old standing over the burning city of New York, that thing Booker saw at the beginning, helps piece it all together, and really the signs were all there that you and Elizabeth were the key to how this story unfolds completely. But there were other little clues that after playing for the second time, you see how they play a big role in the story. The Lutis twins are also two characters who reveal a lot of really interesting clues to the story, and also I got to say are probably some of my favourite characters in the whole of the Bioshock series. Right from the get-go, you hear them talking about this experiment. Rosalind keeps talking about how she thinks it's a pointless exercise, and Robert insists that they need to keep doing it. They also mention how Booker doesn't row, which is very interesting as it is a clear line that shows you have been here before, and that isn't part of the experiment. When in the world, you also see them pop in and out whenever they want to help you out during your travels. When you first see them, it's when you look through these binoculars. When you come out of them, they aren't there anymore. Later in the game, with the piano, in the bar, and in the basement, they also disappear into thin air, which gives a little insight into the idea that they are not part of this universe and can move from one location to the other. One of my favourite bits of theirs is when they ask you to flip a coin. When you do, they say it always lands on heads. When they turn their back, you see a blackboard with hundreds of tally marks on it, proving once again, like with the conversation on the boat, that this experiment had been done over and over and over again. Their story on your second playthrough becomes so clear. They always follow your trails. They always appear at crucial moments. They joke about previous moments and past times you've tried this without really mentioning it. And on top of that, when you discover their backstory, you start to realise more about their experiments with the use of portals and Elizabeth, stating that Comstock was the one who commissioned them to do it. They also mention in their voxophone dialogue that they haven't seen each other in years. So piecing it all together, you realise that somehow through the use of portals, they are able to meet up together and finally be together again. There are just so many clear clues throughout the game that highlight that this is an experiment that happens over and over again. The fact that when Booker dies, he is back in his office and the phrase "bring us the girl and wipe away the debt" rings out and get gradually more clear. It shows where the story is going. I absolutely love the end result of Bioshock Infinite. I really do believe it is some of the best writing in gaming. The subtlety to the clues is so well done on the first playthrough, it really catches you off guard. But when playing it for the second, third, or infinite amount of times, those clues become more clearer, and you are just able to piece it all together with all the elements and just understand what really this narrative is about. It is the perfect ending to a rich narrative about two amazing characters, Booker and Elizabeth, and the way it opens up the franchise to a wide variety of stories and ideas means that going forward, Bioshock can be whatever it wants. Also, a side note, I love how they let you into Rapture again. It's a lovely bit of fan service, but it connects everything together. It makes you realise that familiarity you felt going through Columbia was for a reason. All over the universe there are lighthouses to places that are like this one, with stories to be told. It's a great way of making the franchise all link, and as I say, going forward to Bioshock 4 or whatever they do, they will always have that franchise link, all thanks to the amazing way Bioshock Infinite ended its story. Bioshock Infinite was a real game changer, and I want to state that maybe I have rose-tinted glasses when I talk about games like this one, ones that meant a lot to me when I was growing up. There are problems with Infinite. It's not a perfect game. I don't think it ever deserves a 10 out of 10, but in terms of writing, in terms of world design, characters, story arcs, and overall narrative, I think this game just raises the bar for all story-driven games. It does a fantastic job of immersing you into this new yet somewhat familiar world of Columbia. It tells multi-layered stories about a vast selection of characters and has one of the most intelligent, well-presented stories I have ever played, with a plot twist that'll truly blow you away when you first play it. Infinite may not be the best game in terms of gameplay. It may not be the best FPS ever made. It may not have the best graphics, even though I think its art style is beautiful, but its design is well worth speaking about. And Irrational Games somehow took the ideas behind Bioshock 1 and Bioshock 2 and turned them into a phenomenal third game that not only links those games together, but also opens the doorway for many more to come. There is so much to talk about when looking at Infinite. Like its story, there is so much depth to the game, and I could keep talking for hours. But once again, this video is long enough, so hopefully I didn't waffle on for hours on end, and hopefully it did make sense in the long run. But let me know what you think. Did you enjoy Bioshock Infinite, and what do you think of its story? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. This took a long time to make, so any appreciation would be absolutely amazing. And if you want to see more analytical reviews on Bioshock, then please check out the other ones on the playlist. I'll also put my Discord, Patron and Twitter in the description if you want to support me on there. But that's all for now, guys. Thank you for watching, and I shall see you next time. Cheers.